Okay, another Friday, another talk. This time I'm going to, well, it's kind of a follow on from last week's talk. Maybe not quite so socially or politically charged, but an interesting kind of area to me anyway. Kind of follows on from the point I was making about some of the books in the Norwich Children's Library and how they're so concerned with all sorts of issues, but they're not actually very literate. It's interesting to compare books from a century ago, children's books, with the books of today. And there's two noticeable things about that. One is the kind of presuppositions, assumptions that are built into the books of those days compared to today. And the second is the actual quality of writing, what was expected of the average 5-year-old 100 years ago seems to have been of a lot higher standard than what is expected today. Today's books are horribly banal and almost insulting to some extent. Very poor. The subject matter is usually very poor, a lot of the time politically charged, and has a very low assumption of the child's intelligence. Books of 100 years ago seemed far more, the standard of writing was higher, more involved, and the characters involved were, generally the sort of Rupert Bear and the noddy characters and all that sort of thing. They'd have adventures and they'd do things, and there was that kind of positive aspect and a moral aspect to the way that they conducted themselves. So, that kind of got me thinking about another issue that kind of relates to this. The kind of general decline, this is controversial in itself, a decline in general intelligence. There's not many ways of measuring this and being that accurate, and the best tool we have would seem to be IQ tests. They are controversial in themselves, but they are a very good predictor of a person's success in life. And basically the best tool we have in that way. And they're also controversial because some of the things that they show up they do not fit in very well with current narratives. So I don't want to go into that subject too deeply in this particular video, but they're considered a bit incorrect at the moment in the sort of political sense. So people tend not to want to refer to the data, but the data is actually very good, very well measured, and very reliable. They're actually developed originally in four French schools by two guys, one Monsieur Simon, and Monsieur Binet. I think it was Paris, it's definitely France anyway, in 1905. And they were designed to help children who are underachieving. That was the purpose. They've been used for many somewhat nefarious purposes at times, but all sorts of purposes ever since, and have generally proven very, very reliable. Quite pleasant here. There's a boating lake behind me. I don't know how much you can see of that, but we have boats in the summer, but it's still only just into February, so pretty cold still. There was an interesting effect over the decades, all the way up to the 70s, the end of the 70s, noticed by a guy called James Flynn. James Flynn was a psychologist from New Zealand, and what he noticed was that decade on decade, IQ tests were improving. They're improving fairly substantially, like 2.15, I believe, is 2.14 points per decade, which is quite considerable over several decades. And this phenomenon became known. Morning.
Morning.
Morning. Hello, doggies. Your dog is here. Okay, this became known as the Flynn effect after James Flynn. And it was considered pretty solid science for its time. It's pretty well documented, well supported and all that. Now, this strange phenomenon has happened in the years since it was first noticed. I think Flynn probably first wrote about it in the 1980s, maybe early 1990s, when it seemed pretty solid. But measuring now, and tests have been done in UK, America, Netherlands, Norway, I believe, quite large cohort being a large number of people, and it shows that people are on average not as intelligent as they were before. And in fact, there's been a decline going on since the late 70s, decade on decade. And the even more alarming thing is that decline is going on at the rate of about 4.5 points per decade. So we are considerably more stupid than we were in the late 70s, considerably more so. It reminds me of that film. There was an interesting film a few years back, which is supposed to be a comedy. It was called Idiocracy. And the idea that the future, far from being full of ultra-intelligent, well-informed people, as we seem to expect the future to be, was actually full of complete idiots who could not do a thing for themselves, who even the simplest of simple things was a challenge for them. And when the main character in the film is time transported to the future, and he's just an average Joe Schmo or Joe Blogs from this century, but to these people he seemed ultra intelligent and intellectual, as it were. But yeah, he ended up becoming an advisor to the president, who was also incredibly stupid. But yeah, the thought is, what could be causing this? Why should we be going backwards in general intelligence at such a fast rate? That's a matter of some conjecture. The most obvious thing, I think, most obvious explanation, well, two, I think I'll come up with. The standard of education, I think, is pretty shocking. Particularly, you look at American schools in particular, but British schools are not much better. I think the standard of education has become lower and lower as they tended to focus more and more on non-educational issues, and kind of lost sight of their raison d'etre, their reason to be. And the other thing is the amount of assistance that we have to do every sort of task now. The electronic assistance for everything. I mean, this started in the 80s or the 70s, as the original style calculators, where it was considered quite normal to add up columns of figures or to multiply things together quite easily, quite readily. It was not particularly impressive individual skill to be able to do that. Whereas now, asking the average 18-year-old to do a long calculation without the use of a calculator is pretty challenging for them. I mean, most of us of advancing years have noticed the inability of cashiers to work out even simple maths if the machine doesn't say yes, doesn't do what they want them to do. Even adding up 2 or 3 figures together seems to be impressive to them, which is kind of worrying. Google Maps would be another example. There's a whole area of the brain which, if I was well informed as I should be, I would be able to name, but basically it develops because of spatial awareness and finding your way either without using maps whatsoever, or using maps as a reference and then keeping the information in your brain and working out its relationship to the terrain around you. That's all been taken over by Google Maps. Some people are almost helpless without their Google Map. They find themselves completely stuck in a foreign city. They wouldn't know what to do without consulting the smartphones. Huge problem. On a practical level, all sorts of machines to help us. I was in a car the other day, a Toyota Prius, not a particularly late car, a few years old, but it had sat-nav in it, of course, but also had a camera, so looking behind you. Obviously very onerous to look behind you, so it had a camera. It had little things that go beep, beep, beep when you get near anything. And I was told that some models even have a button that you can press and it will reverse park for you. All very convenient, but the more convenient these things become, the lazier they make us and the more helpless. So, yeah, this has left us kind of open. You know, a lot of the ideas I spoke of last week, a lot of the absurdities in modern life, modern political and social discourse, are so absurd. I don't think people wouldn't have given them the time of day a few decades back, but now they're talked of as if they were serious propositions. And one of the things bordering on that is this notion of diversity is strength. Diversity can be useful in some situations. Diversity of opinion in particular, as we've found out recently in the COVID epidemic. The lack of diverse opinions led us to going down some very erroneous routes, very dangerous, and I think a lot of people are going to suffer for years to come because of the decisions that were made. There was no diversity of opinion and no diversity allowed in that sense. But what they're normally talking about is the idea of mixing up, choosing people on the grounds of race is the obvious one, sexual orientation, gender, whatever. You know, essentially slicing and dicing people down into groups, and then saying we must have representation for those groups. And these people get to sit on, you know, you've got to have a nice diverse scientific panel or something like that, where the people are hired not because of their expertise, because they know their subject particularly well, but because they happen to fulfill the right quota. I mean, the obvious kind of example of this is if you were flying in a 757 across the Atlantic, and when you sit there, you hope that your pilot has been chosen because of their general competence, that they can do their job and do it very well. It's the best they could get for the money they were offering. But in this day and age, as Virgin Airlines in particular seem to be indicating, it's quite just as likely to be because they fulfilled some quota, they fulfilled the criteria of a quota that had to be filled. This is not very confidence inspiring. I don't really want to have a pilot like that, or an advisor of any sort like that. I think simple merit in these critical positions should be the criteria. And what this has led to is kind of a reliance on it. There's a guy called Brett Weinstein who does the Dark Horse podcast, very excellent podcast. But he speaks of legacy competence and the feeling that we're surviving now on the legacy competence of previous generations. But as those people get older and are replaced by youngsters who they generally don't have much experience in the fields they're talking about, but generally their degrees and their studies have all been data driven, all been things that you could bring down to a spreadsheet level and just examine data and make comparisons and all that sort of thing, but don't actually have much hands-on experience of life, nature, the science they're involved in, whatever. It's all kind of via data now. And increasingly over time, you're going to see, and we are seeing, more and more quite stupid mistakes being made by people who don't really understand the very field that they're supposed to be specialists in. I mean, going back to the pandemic again, there was a guy, I think it's Ferguson, I'm not dead certain of his first name, so I won't say in case I get it wrong. But he made these huge predictions of numbers of deaths and injuries due to COVID at the start, based on modelling the This seems to be the route that many go down, and they've proven to be hopelessly, ridiculously wrong. But we still carry on using that modelling as if it was okay. I don't know, there's so many fields where this applies to. So it's a worrying for the future, and how can we address such a problem? Well, the way you could address it is by reforming your education systems to become, to be focused back on education. I mean, it's a startling thought, isn't it, to actually try to educate people, rather than trying to fill their heads with opinions about political issues, social issues, scientific issues like global warming, but again, only following one narrative. Let's actually have some focus on the building blocks of education. Science done properly. English language, ability to put together an essay. Maths, the ability to read a book, to settle down and read a book and actually be able to focus that long on one given subject. If we fail to do that, it will only get worse. And the other thing would be, on an individual level, to try to stop relying on so many devices, to try to free yourself from the need to use Google Maps, the need to use calculators. The latest one is ChatGPT, I think it's called, which can write whole letters or books, articles, essays, as has been noticed by some of the brighter students. It can write a whole thesis for you in seconds flat. But it's going to make, it's a marvellous, impressive piece of technology, but like all the others, it's going to make people incredibly lazy. I won't use it on principle. I want to write my own, do my own Substack stuff, and just want to write. It's part of the pleasure of life, to kind of fashion something, create something yourself, not just press a button and have a machine do it all for you. But are either these scenarios, education or the kind of denial of using devices of such sorts likely to happen? And I'm afraid the answer is no. So, not the bringer of glad tidings here, I'm fairly pessimistic about the future. I think the degree of intelligence in the world, human intelligence, is likely to go on declining, and if anything, it will probably accelerate. Sometimes I feel that living the lifetime I have, I've been a lucky man. I was born at a good time, and I'll probably shuffle off my mortal coil at a relatively sensible time. The times to come do not look particularly inviting. Okay, usual stuff. Press if you like, comment, feel free to comment, and even subscribe. I'm up to the dizzy heights of 4 subscribers now. Wow. Okay, and hope to see you next week. Bye for now.